Good afternoon. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Katina Powers, and I'm with Cox Business. And I would like to welcome you to the Collaboration Theater at the FCA Defensive Cyber Operations Symposium. This afternoon's session is entitled Defense Information Systems Network as an Essential Weapon for the Nation's Defense. Our speaker will be Charles Osborn. Please note that today's session is sanctioned for the continuing education credit. So if you need to do that, we've got somebody at the back standing there. Susan, will you raise your hand? Who will scan your badge if you'd like credit for today's session. So Mr. Osborne currently serves as the Infrastructure Executive's Civilian Deputy for Defense Information Systems Agency. So everyone, if you would please help me welcome Mr. Osborne.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody had a decent lunch. You're not going to be too sleepy. I could put you to sleep if you'd like, but you probably will not wake up, so do not sleep. We do still have some seats up front. I know there's a lot of people standing in the back. If you want to come on, I know, Jeff, you want to come up here, don't you, right? As was mentioned, Charles Osborne, Acting Infrastructure Executive. Actually, she mashed my two titles up. I was previously the Civilian Deputy for the Infrastructure Directorate, but right now I'm acting as the Infrastructure Executive. If you were at the DISA 104 briefing with Mr. Montemorano, I'm one of many of the actings currently in an executive role here at DISA, but we're okay. We're keeping the fort. We're keeping the stage lit for the acting, to making sure everything's going to keep going the way it needs to go for DoD and the warfighters. All right, so I'm going to talk to you today about the DISN and what we provide as part of the DoDN. So again, referencing back to Mr. Montemorano's brief on Tuesday, he talked about everything that DISA does and the breadth and the scope of what we have. Our component, the big part of what we provide in the Infrastructure Directorate is the DISN, and that's what I'm going to cover today in quite detail. So I've been warned to go at least an hour. That will not be a problem for me. As a matter of fact, I'll probably have somebody to tell me hey, all right, time to cut it off for questions. But if I do go quickly, then we'll have time for questions in the end, and I'm sure with all these people here, we'll have plenty of questions. Standard disclaimer. There we go. All right, so we wanted to start this briefing off with our DISN strategic focus. And one of the key pieces on this chart that I want to focus you guys in on is the second bullet there. And I already kind of mentioned it. You know, we are a core of the Department of Defense Information Network, the DoDN. So the DISN, so a lot of people get confused by that, right? The DISN and the DoDN are not the same thing, right? We are the core infrastructure and network component of the DoDN. There are other components outside of our purview that make up the rest of the DoDN. And then as you saw on the charts yesterday, and then outside of all of that is the commercial network or the internet. But what we provide or what we do for the DoDN and our strategic focus is essentially enable, support, connect, and integrate and deliver. That's what our directorate does globally for the warfighters. And I'm going to go through a lot of this in greater detail, but this is kind of just a summary of what our strategic focus is for the DISN. All right, so we are operationally focused, right? So we are under the Operations and Sustainment Center in DISA. So I work for Mr. Dave Bennett, and we are one of 4 directorates in that center. But essentially, if you look on the left side of the chart, what we focus, or what our primary mission is delivering the senior leader communications. We have a couple of organizations within the directorate that do that. Specifically, we have our Senior Leader Communications Division, which provides things like the hotline, if you've ever heard of that. and our executive travel kits to support the Secretary of Defense. So the hotline, obviously, we have a couple of them, but probably the one everybody is familiar with. I'm sure you've seen it in the movies, the red phone for the president to be able to dial up whoever the president of Russia is, so that they have direct lines of communication. And then we have a similar capability for China as well. So we don't like to have to use those very often, but we provide that capability. In addition to that, we actually have another organization under another division that has a very similar mission set as WACA, but they don't do it for the White House. They provide similar types of comms for not only special events, like if we have an Olympics, or other special events, like we actually support the candidates during the presidential election, but then they also support State Department and other types of events that are going on nationally. They're not international, they only support things that are here in the nation. The second one on there is basically providing the infrastructure for the combatant commanders to conduct joint operations throughout the world. So that's what probably we are most known for, providing the terrestrial, the SATCOM, all the networks to enable all the communications that are provided through DISA and also outside of DISA. And then on the bottom is supporting the warfighter missions, and you see the drone up there, so that is a direct reference to the airborne intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance mission, where we provide the transport for that, which includes not only the commands to be able to fly the planes remotely, but also the video distribution coming back and then distributing that in a near real-time fashion to the mission partners who need it. On the right side of your chart is a list of several operations, one from each combatant command that we actually directly support. So it's kind of showing you, our operational focus, how we're providing capabilities that make a difference to our mission set. All right, this is who we serve. I always note every time I brief this chart it's really not complete, but this is kind of what we can fit on the chart. So we got obviously the military services on the left side. We got the executive branch. I mentioned some of the capabilities that we provide for that. Like I mentioned WACA earlier. We provide a lot of the long-haul comms for White House Communications Agency. We also support other federal governments as well. And then on the right side of the chart, we have all the combatant commands, and we did make the last-minute addition with Cybercom becoming a unified command. It is now on our chart as a combatant command. And then at the bottom, we list some of the agencies, the DoD agencies and activities that we support. But the glaring omission on this, because I actually use this chart when I'm having information exchange meetings with our coalition partners, is our multinational partners that we deal with and we exchange services with as well. And there's a myriad of them. I always tell them, I was like, well, we just kind of lump that into the federal government, right? That's where those are lumped in. So as you can see from this chart, we have a very wide scope of partners or of customers that we directly support. Clicker doesn't seem to work. There we go. All right, so it was just mentioned, if you were in the lunch session, Colonel Kraft mentioned the 24 billion number. Essentially what we did is we looked at our infrastructure and we compared it to what a commercial service provider, if they were providing and if they had the infrastructure and the reach that we have, it actually turned out to be comparable to a $24 billion commercial company. Don't ask me how that math was done, because I wasn't involved in that, but it sounded like a really good number, so that's what we use. So it's a good marketing number. But we're essentially broken into, and what this chart is showing is we have two main portfolios of capabilities. We have the network portfolio, which is what I think a lot of people are familiar with the our terrestrial transport, our gateways. So we don't have all the gateways within DISA, but we are providing some of that gateway functional support. Our multinational information sharing, which we'll talk a little bit more about that, because I know Mr. Montemorano mentioned that yesterday as well, and what's happening with that. The senior leader communications that we already talked about, and some special services. So one thing that I didn't mention under the special services that a lot of people don't know that we do is we are actually one of the root servers for the internet doing DNS query lookups. So if you're not familiar with that, there are a finite number of root servers that are distributed internationally, and we own one of them. And it's not like one server in a closet. It is, we have several locations that back each other up, and essentially what happens is that if you think about how the internet works and how DNS queries work, we are the dot at the top. So when a DNS lookup is occurring over the network and they're trying to resolve a fully qualified URL like HTTP www.google.com, if your DNS server doesn't have that cached, then it recursively goes up to the top, and so we're at the top level doing that DNS distribution. In addition to having the root server, we also do all of the DNS for the .mil and the .smil and the .sgov. So we provide that DNS capability for them as well. So that's some of the special services that we provide, along with the other ones that I already mentioned. Over on the other side of the chart is our SATCOM portfolio. So today we do the gateways. We've got Teleport. Teleport's one of the ACAT-1 programs in DISA, one of two. We have the EMSS. If you're not familiar with EMSS, that is our essentially netted Iridium capability that we provide. We'll talk about a little bit more about that a little bit later. The UVDS, I mentioned that already. That's part of the AISR program and the video distribution that goes along with that. And then there's a couple others there. I'll mention like the Pathfinders. We are finished with our Pathfinders. Those had to do with being able to find ways to save DoD money on how we're procuring and how we're using our commercial SATCOM bandwidth. So we actually saved the department a lot of money going through those Pathfinders. So it was actually a really good news story. And then on the bottom, not to bore you with all the details, but we had, I won't read them off to you obviously, but this is kind of one of those charts of a day in the life, if you will, where the amount of terabits of bandwidth that we have across the network, how many circuits we support, how many customers and how many different countries, how many gateways. I mean, it's incredible, the span of our entire infrastructure footprint. And in the middle is this nice chart that shows how it all fits in, right? So we're providing that bottom tier, the DISN Optical, and then the next tier up is our IP and MPLS networks. And then that's really what's supporting, and that's the foundation of all the enterprise services, not only that DISA provides, but also that all the other services and agencies, they are leveraging our network infrastructure to get their capabilities out to the edge. All right, so every year we kind of refresh our evolution plan, if you will. And so here are some key focus areas that we were focusing in on our last iteration. So I'm not going to read all of them to you, but and I apologize that the font's kind of small. Excuse me. But I didn't really want to take any of them out because they're all pretty relevant. But essentially, as you see in the titles, we're united in service. So we got a lot of, and I'm going to spend a lot of time in the last charts really focusing in on specific projects that we are currently working on from our evolutionary plan. But again, we're focusing on the united in service, connecting the user, evolving the network, and emerging DISN services. So part of my ask to you guys, especially the industry partners out there, is we talk about innovation all the time, but we're really serious. We want to bring innovation to the way we're delivering services. I've actually grown up in this particular area. I've spent probably the last 15 years of my career in this organization surrounding on the network services and how we're delivering network capabilities to the warfighter. And frankly, we're not keeping pace with the commercial industry out there, and that's something I really want to change. So the innovations that you guys are doing, your service providers, and I know some of you are out there in the audience, those innovations that you are providing, I need to try to bring those in to our network so that we can evolve at least a little bit faster than we are right now, because technology is changing, and I've got several examples where that's kind of already gotten to us. I got a specific one I'll just mention right now is, so we just recently, about a couple months ago, got a service provider in the UCOM theater who gave us a 30-day disconnect notice on a Sonnet circuit that we were leasing from them. And so we had to quickly figure out and get on contract a replacement capability using Ethernet. So we've got lots of Sonnet in our network, right? So it's not a dead technology, but it's no longer being developed. So there's no longer any development. So we need to move away from Sonnet and Tdm infrastructures. I'm going to talk a lot more about that in a couple slides, but that's one example where we really need to get out ahead and evolve and innovate and be able to deliver these capabilities without getting those disconnect notices. All right, DISN transport of the future. So the big takeaway on this slide, if you look over in the low to medium Earth orbit SATCOM, we have already done our first contract to do a medium Earth orbit capability at one of our locations. Actually, if you remember the keynote yesterday at lunch, we specifically mentioned Korea, and that's where we're putting this capability in today. So to get at that use case, at that particular item that remember the Admiral had mentioned that we've been trying to figure out how to do that for years. We now have new technologies becoming available with LEO and MEO constellations going up to be able to provide greater bandwidth at lower latency than traditional SATCOM in the geospace, to be able to actually, satisfy requirements if we get disconnected, right? So all of our comms going into Korea are either the geo SATCOM or the undersea cable infrastructure. The undersea is obviously big bandwidth, low latency. The geo SATCOM, the bandwidth's not quite as big, although they're getting better in that space, but you still have the much higher latency, somewhere around 300 milliseconds depending on the constellation you're dealing with. But when we go into the low and medium Earth orbits, because they're closer to the surface, the latencies are much less and the bandwidths are much higher. So we're really got our finger on the pulse on the different constellations that are coming up so that we can leverage those capabilities to make our infrastructure more survivable. And that's really the key to this chart is how do we make the DISN a more survivable network? Because we're using it in a much different way, especially if you look at how we're doing the joint regional security stacks, how we're going to commercial cloud and mil cloud, how we're really decentralizing a lot of that processing, and then to be able to assuredly deliver those services to our warfighters. See, I'm already putting a lot of people to sleep. All right, so then at the bottom you can see that's where our traditional services that we provide. We are looking, cellular on wheels is also another interesting technology and we have a couple use cases where we're looking at how do we use that capability to deliver our services. There we go. All right, I'm sure if you've stopped by 3 booths today or yesterday, at least one of them probably talked about SDN. So SDN, software-defined networking, that is a huge topic right now, not only here at AFCEA, I think, but across industry. So we obviously don't want to be left behind. We want to have software-defined networking built into our networks much earlier than what we have adopted emerging technologies in the past. I always like to use the example of MPLS. DISA and DoD was really late to the game on delivering MPLS capabilities. We got it now, but we were probably 5 to 7 years late behind commercial. I don't want to be that late when it comes to SDN. But SDN and it says NFV, right? Network Function Virtualization. It means different things to different people. So what I typically do when I'm talking to industry is I talk about use cases, specific use cases that are impacting me and impacting my warfighters and my ability to deliver services. And I'm going to throw one out there, which is the Gauntlet Challenge that I've given it to a couple people already. And Andrew, you'll like this one. Probably one of the biggest pain points we have today in our network is when we have an internet outage, how do I quickly move traffic and get it up on the other IAPs, right? Our IAPs really don't act as one internet access point. So, and we have a lot of internet traffic. You guys like to surf YouTube, apparently. A lot of good cat videos out there. So, I'm not really concerned about the cat videos, but we actually have real live mission traffic going across our internet access points. And we have several customers who tell us that on a daily basis. I can give you two really good examples, DLA and Transcom. They are really using the internet and to be able to do their business with commercial providers or commercial partners. So why is it so difficult, right? Well, we have a lot of complex applications going on at our internet access points. We have a requirement to do symmetric routing, which means if the request goes out this IAP, the response has to come back from the same IAP. So it's not a very, you can't use the standard protocols of the routing, of the routers and the switches to just automatically do what they normally would want to do. So it's a very manual process for us to fail out an IAP. So how can SDN solve that problem? How can SDN basically even predict that, hey, my utilization here or my packet loss is rising, I want to start moving traffic now, and not necessarily have to have an operator come in and start banging on the keyboard. Because correct me if I'm wrong, when we fail out an IAP, it 3-4 hours to get all the traffic moved, especially if it's during peak, right? Am I wrong? I can see that. It's not their fault. I mean, it's a very complex system, right? It's not operations' fault. It's, we have to basically, it's all based on the conditions of the network at the time when the outage occurs. And so you may have a great plan to move your traffic to this IAP, but when the outage occurs, it's full or it's near full. So I can't move it there. I got to move it somewhere else. So I have to basically go in, I have to see, and I have to, as I'm moving traffic, conditions are constantly changing. So it is a very difficult task. And that's why it's the gauntlet one from my perspective of how can we use software-defined networking to solve that problem. So what are we doing today, right? Well, we're really only dipping our toe in the water. There's a much bigger effort called Software-Defined Enterprise that we are a component of. But on the network side, our initial fury or trial, or if you will, into software-defined networking is automated provisioning. And so the concept is that with layer 3 and layer 2 VPNs, customers would be able to come in through our order entry system. They would be able to see what resources are available and be able to order a VPN service and have that delivered in minutes. All right, sounds great, right? Well, we haven't tied it to the back-end system of how you're going to charge for it, all this other good stuff, right? So the technology can get us there. It can get us to do that very rapidly. But I'm sure you're all, well, maybe not all of you. Some of you are probably thinking, and for what? Why are we doing that? We don't really have a lot of customers calling up or ordering VPN services. It's really not, it really wasn't meant for that. But those harder use cases, like the one I mentioned with the internet access and the internet traffic, they're going to be predicated on the ability of our controllers and orchestration to be able to automatically move traffic based on network conditions. So it's kind of a beginning step to how do I get to that end state utopia where the network or the orchestration of the network is aware of the conditions and can react faster than we can react based on when our customers as a sensors call up and tell us, hey, you've got a problem, and then we go figure out what was that problem and how do I fix it. So it's really a beginning, not necessarily an end, and we want to build upon that. And then eventually, as part of the SDE, one of the use cases that kind of cross our infrastructure and then into the data center is to be able to have not only orchestration and SDN and NFV occurring at the data center to be able to spin up additional capacity and applications there, but to also, in the same vein, in the same token, we can reconfigure or add capacity within the network to be able to satisfy those requirements. So that's really, I think, from a high level where we want to go. These initial steps are essentially that, just initial steps. They sound great, not really going to be a lot of utility, but to having the orchestration and the controllers to do the automated provisioning is a key enabler to get to those other capabilities we want. So I actually thought about not putting this chart in because I didn't know if it was going to resonate well, but I'm glad I left it in there. All right, so I've got 6 charts that's going to talk about specific priorities and specific programs or projects that we are currently running today, supporting the strategic focus that I showed you earlier in the charts. So if I went through all of them, this session will go over well over an hour, and I certainly want to leave room for questions because I'm sure there's some burning questions out there. And I'm already 25 minutes in, so I think I'm doing good on time. All right, so here on priority 1 are DISN enhancements. There are several on here. I will key in on a couple that are really near and dear to my heart. We already just spent a lot of time on software-defined network, so I won't cover that as much. But another one is gray core services. We also call this our CFC core because gray core means different things to different people. But essentially what we want to be able to provide is the first level or first layer of encryption in a commercial solutions for classified environment as an enterprise capability. All right, so what does that mean? So we have several CSFC use cases that we're working on, specifically the first one that we worked on, and I think I got news this morning that the automatic failover was successful, is for our Deck Tech, which is our executive travel kit CSFC solution we did for AFRICOM. So essentially what the executive travel kits, if you're not familiar with them, it's essentially having a briefcase-like kit that senior leaders would take with them when they travel to be able to log into CIPRNet. All right, seems kind of archaic, right? Well, especially as archaic as if you have to have a type 1 encryption, because then there's a lot of different procedures and TTPs and things you have to do to make sure to keep that secure and safe and you don't lose it, which is why they really wanted to go with commercial solutions for classified. Because in the commercial solutions environment, I don't have to worry about its crypto gear. I got to keep it under lock and key. So it's only classified when it's turned on, and when I turn it off, it all goes away. So that was kind of the first use case. But we have several other use cases, coalition partners being for one. We also, we have a lot of customers who have a non-persistent CIPRNet requirement. I think this is a good use case for that. I don't think we still have CIPRNet dial-up, but we used to satisfy that with CIPRNet dial-up, which I think we only recently got rid of maybe a couple years ago. But that's a good use case, I think, for CSFC. They don't need an always-on connection to CIPRNet. So how do we get them into the environment when they need to be in, and then they can put it away when they're done and not necessarily have to worry about having a class 5 safe. So again, we go back to, okay, what does that mean in an enterprise environment, right? Well, so we got certificates or keys. We have a certificate authority that creates those keys. But today, to get those keys on these devices and to get these keys distributed, it's very manual, right? We have to burn it to a CD or do a swivel chair. We can't use thumb drives, so that's out of the question. But actually, in some cases, we had to get waivers because some capabilities required a thumb drive. But we don't have an automated way to do that key distribution. So that's part of that capability of, in an enterprise solution, how do I get more automated key distribution and certificate distribution? But then we also need to be able to monitor and be able to have tools to do the analytics behind it to make sure that our keys aren't being compromised or being used in ways that they weren't intended to be used. And then the automated CRL list. So those are things that are part of that enterprise solution. But that's just the inner layer, right? But we DISA are also responsible for that outer layer for the networks that we're responsible for, like CIPRNet. So if I'm doing CSFC for CIPRNet, I am not only providing that key distribution on the inner tunnel, but I'm also going to be providing that on the outer tunnel. The next one I'll talk about is one right underneath that, social networks. So this is a good one to talk about. As I mentioned with the cat videos before, we have a lot of internet traffic that we seem to think is not really mission related. We have a lot of back and forth with customers and services about what's mission and what's not. Probably the easiest one to describe is YouTube. I think if I told you YouTube and asked you if it was mission or non-mission, probably most of you would say it's not mission. However, we have services, and I won't call them out, but we have services who actually put their training videos on YouTube. So they do a lot of training and other things using YouTube, which actually seems like a good idea at the time, I'm sure. But then it gives us a really gray area. I can't just necessarily restrict or I won't say block, because we've tried that before, that didn't work. but it's harder to basically, determine what's really mission versus non-mission. The other one I say is clear-cut not mission is Netflix. We should just be blocking Netflix. You guys shouldn't be watching movies on the Nippernet. but even the YouTube example, DISA has a YouTube site. If you didn't know that, we actually have a YouTube. And these sessions, when they're recorded at the conference, they're actually uploaded on the YouTube site. You can go back, I think, 2 or 3 years of AFCEA conferences and watch the videos of it's mostly the bigger ones, not these smaller ones, but the keynote addresses and stuff, they're still up there. Also Industry Day, we post those videos as well. Facebook, there's another example, right? I think you would probably say Facebook is non-mission. Well, DISA has a Facebook page too, and we put those videos on Facebook as well. So the line between what's mission and what's non-mission is kind of blurred. So what does that have to do with social networking? So we're looking at how can we separate our internet browsing traffic from the official Nippernet network, from our FOU network. And one of the ways we're looking at doing that is secure virtual browsing. And I think there are a couple booths out here that you can go to where they have capabilities that do that type of function. But the goodness of the secure virtual browsing is there are inherent vulnerabilities of using an internet browser. An internet browser can actually execute code on your machine. So what we're doing with social network, or what we're attempting to do, is to not run a browser on your local machine. It would run in a server outside of the DODN. So it would be on the dirty internet. So if it gets compromised, we just cut it off. And we're not compromised. The server that was giving us that virtual browser, that's what would be compromised. So it's an interesting dialogue and an interesting capability that we're trying to bring in. I think we've already piloted one internally in DISA, but we are pitching that to the department to have as a capability for across the department. There are some services already using these types of capabilities in their environment, so I don't think getting them to buy off on it's going to be too difficult. But I think for us to be successful, it's going to have to be transparent to the users. If we tell them they have to use this browser, that ain't going to work, because your favorite browser may be Internet Explorer and mine might be Firefox, and so I've already told my team if we want that to work, then it's going to have to be as transparent as possible to the user. All right, I think for the rest of them, I will skip over and go to the next chart, unless you have a burning question. All right, legacy elimination. So I talked a little bit about TDM already. We did finally get our last customer off of our DATM's network. So we had a huge global ATM network. And we just recently, a few months ago, took our last customer finally off of that network. And now we are actively tearing that network down and decommissioning that infrastructure. But DATM's is just one, right? So next we've got our Tdm elimination. So I already mentioned the challenges with Sonnet. But Sonnet, that's not even as near a problem as our low-speed Tdm, because we have a massive prominent infrastructure a massive Promina network in our infrastructure. So if you're not familiar with Promina, Promina is an old TDM multiplexing device. Been around forever. Started off as, I think, ADNX, or at least that's my first experience with it. It went from ADNX to IDNX to Promina to NX1000. Really old technology. The company is actually no longer in business, so we really need to get that infrastructure out of the network. We are actively working that one. So again, industry, if you have anything that you think to help us move that faster, I'm certainly willing to hear what you got and looking for your help. The other one's up there, Defense Red Switch Network. So this is the same issue. We have a red Promina network specifically for our red switch network. So we are actively working to move that to an IP environment. And then SIPRNet access migration. We are well into our SAM, and the goodness for us and the goodness for our customer is, we're getting out of the standard point-to-point encryption requirement under the old SIPRNet rules and going to a point-to-multipoint where we can satisfy multiple customers with one encryption device, and our customers. So they'll each have one, but it greatly reduces the total number of cryptos across the department. And then the other ones that are up there, that's going to help us move everybody off of the legacy PE routers that we installed back in 2003, and we've upgraded a few times to our new JPE routers. All right, survivable infrastructure. I kind of hit on this earlier as well. So because we're using the network a lot differently these days, survivability of the network means something more than it used to. When we did Gig B back in the early 2000s, we thought survivability, all we needed was 2 routes out, maybe more than one virtual path, but we only had 2 physical paths out of our major nodes. And we found out quickly that that wasn't enough. When you lose both of those paths and you isolate 2 major commands, that was not a good day for DISA. We never thought it would happen, but we're in a different environment now. So we're moving forward to adding survivability, especially to the large data centers, our combatant commands, essentially the ones who are conducting operations, to ensure that it would take more than 2 outages to isolate them. So we're in a different world, so that's why we have to become more survivable. So we have a lot, as you can see, we have a lot of different projects in this particular area. I mentioned the mid-Earth orbit already. And then one I haven't mentioned on the bottom left for you guys is transmission security. So we actually went through the planning process and got approved an issue paper to extend essentially our bulk encryption, which traditionally has only been OCONUS, to globally. So we will do bulk encryption across our entire infrastructure. All right, see how I'm doing on time. I'm doing pretty good. All right, I will try to at least give 15 minutes for questions, but I'm cutting it close right now. All right, so in satellite, we've got a lot of satellite improvements going on. Probably the one thing I want to mention, I mentioned a lot of the UVDS and the AISR already. But EMSS, if you're not aware, that's based off the Iridium constellation, and Iridium is currently putting new capabilities and new satellites into orbit. I can't remember what the number is right now, but as those capabilities go into orbit, then we will be able to provide additional services. We're also getting ready to, our contract with Iridium is getting ready to expire, and so we're working with them to negotiate a new contract. Probably the other elephant in the room, I'm sure if you guys have read the National Defense Authorization Act from FY18, specifically 1601, which dealt with commercial SATCOM. So I'm sure there's the burning question of, all right, well, what are you guys doing? Or how are you implementing that? So kind of in a nutshell, that specific authorization act directed DISA to move the commercial SATCOM programs to AF space. So similar discussion that Mr. Montemurano mentioned about the multinational information sharing environment, but that was done under a different construct, and we'll get to that in a minute. But in this case, they went through a very thorough working group to come up with COAs. What I can tell you is the COA that was selected is that they are going to move the positions and move those projects to AF space to a place in the NCR not yet determined. So we are working very closely with Air Force to make sure that there is no mission impact. That was our number one priority, that we don't impact the users. But essentially, the commercial SATCOM contracts that we provide services for, those will be moving to Air Force. And that does include the EMSS. So I've had a lot of questions at the conference about that. So that's basically where we're at right now. We got the working group reconvening to figure out how we're going to implement that COA. So there is still some decisions to be made before it becomes finalized. All right, so I mentioned the M&IS. So here, Coalition Information Sharing. So there's going to be another session, I believe, tomorrow that's going to go in depth on all the different things we're doing with Coalition. So I won't steal all of their thunder. I'll encourage you guys to attend that session. I'll probably be there in the audience as well. But here are the on the screen are all the programs that we currently have running in the M&IS environment. So again, as Mr. Montemurano mentioned yesterday, there was a programming decision memorandum that was submitted that directed DISA to move these programs to Air Force as well. So again, kind of same scenario with commercial SATCOM. We're working with Air Force, making sure that we have a smooth transition. He did say that, and the memo did say that is supposed to occur on 1 October. I don't think Air Force is going to be ready on 1 October, but we are working very diligently with them to ensure that we meet the requirements of the PITM. So I won't go over all this. I encourage you guys to go to the M&IS session tomorrow. All right, this is my last chart. So we will have 15 minutes for questions, so that's good. So these are the DISN Tech refresh. So part of our budget is specifically a procurement line to do DISN Tech refresh. So we have a couple of really big ones that are getting ready to wrap up, and that's our optical upgrade, where we're upgrading all of our fiber infrastructure here in the continental United States, making it 100 gig capable. And we're actually using it at the 100 gig level for our MPLS network. At the same time, we're also doing a full MPLS refresh and extending our MPLS reach to several more sites. I think we're going to be up to around 300 some sites where we'll have our total MPLS footprint globally. So those are both scheduled to complete next fiscal year. So I mentioned part of SAM is part of that is our CIPRNet refresh of our and our Ethernet security specification. So we've got a lot of crypto out there that needs to be refreshed. Voice ISP, we have basically session border controllers that need to be refreshed. That's part of what's on our horizon. Let's see, what else do I want to talk about? Oh, domain name servers. So I mentioned to you the groot servers and the DNS servers. We obviously have to refresh those every few years as technology continues to evolve. All right, so these are essentially all of the different things that are in our tech refresh portfolio. I won't go over all of them because I do want to give you time for questions. And I do believe that's my last chart. Yes. All right, so we got a mic up here. If you got questions, and I know you do, I hope you all didn't fall asleep. Come on, nobody? Really? All right, there we go.
Bill Schultz, Air Force District, Washington. You know, I'm a planner, and I typically plan for what I'm going to do next, but what I'm going to plan after that too. So you're looking at, are you looking at intent-based networking as a follow-on to software-defined networking?
All right, so I'm sure most of you didn't hear that question. He asked if we were looking at intent-based networking as a follow-on to SDN. I'm not familiar with intent-based networking, but I am certainly open to any and all innovative technologies that we can bring to bear on the DISN. I've had several discussions this week about SD-WAN, for instance, so I don't know if that fits into that or not. But you know, I am certainly I'm certainly interested in learning what that capability can bring to bear and how we deliver services to the warfighter. No one else? Oh, we got to come on. We got to fill the hour. Come on. Come on, nobody. You guys. We had lots of questions last year. All right. Well, maybe I need to go back to another area. Is there anything that I discussed that you guys would like me to go in further detail on that I didn't? Next-gen optical. Okay. So the question was, what's next-gen optical? All right. So I mentioned the optical upgrades that we're getting ready to complete. So there's a couple of components to that. So if you're not familiar with the DISN and how it's constructed, we are in the continental United States. We have a lot of what's called IRU fiber leases, if you will. It's a long-term lease where we essentially lease dark fiber. We put our equipment on it. We light up the fiber. And that's what we're upgrading right now. We're upgrading all those links. When we put them in under gig BE, they were 10 gig capable, but we get to light all the spectrums of light. So we could get about 80 different lambdas, is what they call them, or circuits across one strand of fiber. Well, two pair. So we're upgrading that to 100 gig. So that's part of our next gen optical. That's what we're doing here in the continental United States. We're almost finished with that part of the project. So we got a lot of those links already upgraded, already lit at the 100 gig capacity. So it's essentially giving us a tenfold factor of additional bandwidth. In addition to that, we are also upgrading our TAs, which is our transoceanic cables between the U.S. and Europe. And part of, if you remember, part of our priority is to have the survivable infrastructure. Well, what we are going to do in conjunction with increasing the capacity from 10 gig circuits across the Atlantic to 100 gig circuits, we're also ensuring that we're hitting all available cable landing stations, not only on the east coast of the U.S., but also multiple cable landing stations over in the continent of Europe. And we do this. We're doing this because we have found that certain events, like specifically the tsunami in Japan a few years back, isolated significant portions of our network because all of our undersea cable infrastructure was impacted by that tsunami when it came in. So we want to make sure that we are leveraging all of the landing stations that we can so that we don't get in that predicament again. So over in Europe, we've been working with the Army. There's a lot of Army-owned fiber in Europe. We've upgraded that fiber. It's now 100 gig capable. We are putting our equipment on it, and we are lighting that fiber up as well. Now, we're not quite as fortunate in PAC and in SWA. SWA being Southwest Asia, is we have no IRU fibers there. All of our transmission capabilities in SWA are leased. We do have a lot of 10 gig though now. There's a lot more infrastructure there than when we first started building out infrastructure and everything was commercial or military satellite. So we are upgrading optical capability out there, but again, it's mostly for lease transmission, and then similar thing in PAC. In PAC, one of the charts talked about the 3-core architecture. Again, for survivability, we're putting 3 core nodes on every landmass, interconnecting them with high bandwidth based on what's available in that landmass, and then increasing the undersea capacity to ensure we have survivability not only on island but leaving the island as well. So all of those combined are really what our next-gen optical project is. And as I mentioned, we're well along our way of finishing that up. We are now trying to do the same 3-core type architecture for Southwest Asia to make it more survivable as well. So that one we're just getting started on.
Mark Stein with Bylight. Question for you: for your gray networks, or your, are you going to be using MACsec encryption or optical link encryption?
So not yet determined. So we're still working that. I believe MACsec. I think that is probably a good technology that we need to take a look at. I think we have already started some of that work. Not all of the vendors are yet supporting it 100%. But certainly, it's something that we do want to take a look at from a MACsec environment. I've seen some other things here at the conference as well. I've not seen the optical. You said optical? Yeah. I've not seen that one, but I'm certainly interested in seeing how that works as well. But I think there are a lot of capabilities out there, and again, we tend to think things the way we've always thought of things, right? So we grew up in an IP environment. We grew up in optical, and so we think of those. But I've seen some things here this week that have kind of went completely outside the box of how we traditionally think, and I'm okay with that too, right? If we're doing something and it's the way we did things in the 90s, then it's probably not the way we want to do them anymore. So, and unfortunately, there's a lot of instances I can point to and say, yeah, we designed that, we started that, we're still doing it the same way we did it in 1990s when I started working in this business. So we need to evolve. We need to embrace some of the newer ways of doing this stuff. But again, I will caution you though, innovation, but it still has to meet our stringent security requirements. Because I'm sure if you were in the keynote at lunch today, we are a huge attack vector. The DoD is probably the most attacked entity in the world on the internet, and the amount of defense and blocks and all of that cybersecurity stuff that they're doing at JTF, Joint Force Headquarters Doden. JTF's their old name. Joint Force Headquarters Doden, and internally within DISA, it's just astounding. They mentioned some of the numbers during the lunch. It's just crazy how much doesn't. And that's just what we catch, not necessarily what gets through, right? And so we're trying to figure out how do we get better at that. So we have to basically tamper of, all right, we got to bring in new technology, but we got to make sure it doesn't add or increase our vulnerabilities. So it's really kind of a give and take. So you have to be ready to come in. Those of you who have done it, you know this. You come in, you work with us. We run your product through the paces. We make sure you've gone through the proper certifications, not only ours, but the NSA certifications, like specifically you mentioned MACsec and other encryption devices. There is a NIAP certification requirement for any encryption device. So we got to run you through the paces. You got to get those certifications so that we can limit our exposure and the vulnerability of our network.
Yeah, on one of your slides, I saw 400 gig evolution.
Yes.
Is that correct? But mostly you said 100 gig. And
right.
Anyway, I have a follow-up question that this 3-node SWA architecture, what is the plan and when is that happening?
Can you repeat the second one again?
The 3-node core architecture in SWA.
All right, so good question. So yes, so as I mentioned, we are getting ready to complete our 100 gig, right? So we're not going to complete it and then sit back and kick our feet up and drink a beer. We got to think about what's next, right? So that's why we got 400 gig up there. So as we are completing our 100 gig rollout, now we're starting to look forward to, okay, what's next? Where's industry at with 400 gig and when can we start planning our transition, right? Because we know it's going to happen. So we're not going to sit back and wait for it to happen. We're going to try to get out in front of it. So I know it's been kicked around. I haven't seen any of the 400 gig demonstrations here yet, but we don't want to wait. We want to see, when those capabilities are going to be ready and when we can start planning to do that migration. So then the other question was 3-core architecture. So in most of the land masses in Korea or in Pacific today, we only have 2 nodes, right? And so remember I mentioned about if I had 2 failures, then that's no longer survivable in our new paradigm. So I need to have 3. So I build 3 nodes. I build the bandwidth between the 3 nodes to the sufficient amount of bandwidth that any one of them goes down, the traffic can move to the other 2, and then I have capacity coming out of each one of the 3 leaving the landmass. So that's, in a nutshell, that's the architecture that we built for the Pacific to make it more survivable.
About Southwest Asia, when are you doing there? Okay.
Yeah, so we want to take that architecture that I just mentioned and replicate it in SWA. So we would have essentially 3 major nodes, and we have other nodes as well that come into it, but we would have 3 major nodes in Southwest Asia, and then have the bandwidth leaving that area coming out of those 3, and sufficient to be able to carry the traffic if we lost one of them. So essentially we're taking the PAC architecture and we're going to put that in SWA.
Mr. Osborne, good afternoon. Barry Bateman with Cox Business. Quick question for yourself. First and foremost, thank you very much for your elaborate interpretation of all the things that you've discussed thus far. So I've identified a lot of things that are key factors of what's happening and when it's happening. However, do you have a timeline in which you're talking about rolling these things out or having the necessitable need in completion? Mm-hmm. We've talked about obsolete and networks that are not functioning to proper capacity. So how can we in industry help you to function at full throttle in the next 2 years?
All right, so Jeff's back there. he needed to hear that question. So my general answer is we're not moving fast enough, right?
Roger that.
So we need to move faster. Now there is a dichotomy. Like I specifically mentioned the red switch transition to IP. All right, so at a very senior level, we're being told you're not moving fast enough. You need to get off this prominent stuff, because and this is the way I look at it. We are one serious component failure away from catastrophe, because there's nobody that makes this equipment anymore, and we're doing self-sparing. So if it starts failing, we're dead. But then again, on the user side, they're like, whoa, we're not ready to go to this IP stuff. I'm not comfortable with it. I want this dedicated, transmission that I've always had, and it always works. And I picked up the phone, and I've always got dial tone. And if you put me in an IP space, then that may not happen. I won't have the quality of service that I need. And it's part of an education as well. So my ask to industry is, I've got a lot of tough customers, and I need your help to sell them on the new technology. And it's really a sales job. And in most cases, I can go down the line and say, we were able to show them that it worked. And once they were comfortable with it, then they were okay with moving. But we still have a lot of customers who are kind of what you would call a box hugger. They love that old technology, and they don't take that away from me, because I know it works. And I think we need to show them that the new technology works as well. And oh, by the way, it's better.
Fantastic. So at the end, I'll just offer my business card to you.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
we at Cox are more than willing to help you.
All right, great.
All right.
No other questions? Did I make the hour? I'm very close. All right, well, thank you, everyone. I'm available up here if you had a question that you didn't want to ask, but just want to ask me privately. I'm up here.